Unbeknownst to a lot of people, Quinton Rampage Jackson has been involved in a feud with Dana White for over a decade. And the reason why it rarely gets brought up is because Rampage goes back and forth in choosing how to publicly address it. Sometimes taking a mature stance, implying that he's long moved past it.
If I'm gonna be honest, I have nothing against Dana because I know that it's just business with him. It's nothing personal. And Dana's done a lot for the sport that I love.
And sometimes taking a completely different approach.
Dana, you doing good. Dana, I don't give a about Dana.
It seems like Rampage is trying his best to let bygones be bygones, but no matter how hard he tries, there are times where he can't help but be reminded of the past and how much it affected his life. And in this video, I'll explain why it's so hard for him to let this grudge go. I've always got the impression that on a human level, Dana really likes Rampage. He always seemed to find his brand of humor amusing, and at one point really appreciated what he brought to the UFC.
Rampage used to call me Dana, it's good to be white.
But being that one of the main reasons why Rampage's contract was purchased in 2007 was to give Chuck Liddell a chance at redemption after being humiliated by him in Pride FC, his entrance into the company wasn't exactly a hero's welcome. Not only did Dana and Chuck have a well-publicized personal relationship, with Dana considering him one of his best friends, Rampage also embarrassed Dana because as the UFC president, he was so confident that Chuck would go undefeated in the Pride FC tournament, he bet $250,000 on him. And considering that the UFC was purchased for $2 million only 2 years prior, losing that much money was an enormous hit. And it's a safe bet that it caused more than a couple of fights between Dana and the Fertitta brothers, who were financing the company directly out of their pockets. So Rampage beating Chuck again 4 years later and becoming the UFC's light heavyweight champion had to be a bitter pill to swallow. And according to Rampage, he noticed a distinct shift in treatment backstage, with UFC staff going from friendly and welcoming to cold and unapproachable. But being that he was now the champion, and a very marketable one at that, there weren't any real issues as he was undeniably valuable to the company. But once he lost the title to Forrest Griffin, that began to quickly change. The UFC felt like he was increasingly difficult to deal with, especially during an era where most fighters were expected to take what they were given with little to no negotiation, for fear of being looked at like one of those greedy boxers that only fight for money. And I understand that this still goes on to this day, but it's a lot safer for a fighter to be transparent and say that they want to earn money, and if he feels like they have a lot to offer, Dana will usually concede.
You know, when you talk to him, two things: he wants to get paid, and he wants to fight higher level competition. It's like we're gonna have to pay him, get him some fights.
This was a time where Dana would come on a microphone and completely unironically berate fighters for wanting to be popular and get paid.
I don't want to be 45 years old competing in the UFC, you know? I don't want to be doing a 20-year span of, murder myself trying to make $1 million.
And a lot of these other guys do. That's not the way they look at it.
Yeah, they look at it just slaves for you, man. That's what it comes down to. That's all they care.
That's what all these guys feel like, slaves.
No.
These guys are competitors who come in here and want to prove that they're the best. Some of them fight 3-4 times a year.
Because you're going to make them a superstar.
Because this is what they want to be.
That's your quote words.
No,
I'm going to make you a superstar.
No, you're the one that wants to be a superstar. No. These guys want to be fighters. That's the difference.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, you want to be a superstar. Forgot. Are you hosting a party tonight, Dana?
I am. You coming?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
As much of a meme as he's become over the years, Tito isn't wrong here. In those early days, the strategy was always to grow the brand of the UFC before growing the profiles of individual fighters, as it was yet to dominate the MMA market the way it does now, so having a superstar fighter go over to a different company could have been catastrophic. And fighters like Tito and Rampage, who had competent management and knew their worth, were looked at as being problematic, because they wouldn't fight cheap, but at the same time were popular enough that the UFC couldn't just bench them or terminate their contract. So when Rampage acted like he still had value after losing his belt, it threw the company for a loop, because he was right, but in their eyes he wasn't supposed to know that, which created a lot of conflict when he took on opportunities outside of the UFC. Coming to a head during an incident where Rampage decided to postpone his fight against Rashad Evans after coaching against him on The Ultimate Fighter 10 to film The A-Team, a blockbuster movie based on an 80s TV show where he secured the role of B.A. Baracus, previously played by Mr. T. This would have been a huge deal in 2025, but in 2010 it threatened to make Rampage the most recognizable face in the company, possibly even transcending it. And that, combined with the fact that he was going back on a previous commitment to a fight date in order to make it happen, really rubbed Dana the wrong way.
Rampage is still fighting. He's an active fighter that took that spot on The Ultimate Fighter, and he can say he did it for me or whatever, but it was a commitment there to fight at the end of the show. You know, and he could have fought in that fight and then went and did 7 movies for all I cared. You know, he could have took 4 years off and you know, did whatever he wanted to do. He was obligated to take that fight. You know, we put him on the show. Rashad went on the show, and Rashad's sitting on the sidelines. You know, it affected a lot of different things.
Dana was about to sue me.
I love that movie, by the way.
Thank you. Dana was going to sue me for $5 million.
Feeling like he did the UFC a favor by doing The Ultimate Fighter for the second time despite hating the process and not receiving the same courtesy back for what he felt was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and then having to be publicly berated and privately threatened with a lawsuit really soured Rampage's view of Dana White and the UFC and was ultimately the key reason for the fracturing of their relationship.
It's like my dream, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I used to watch this show with my dad back when, I remember when he used to live with me, you know what I'm saying? As a kid, like, this is something that I have to do. If I don't do this, I'm going to be kicking myself in the ass for the rest of my life. I'm a loyal person, you know, so I take care of people, take care of me, but people don't take care of me, I don't take care of them. So I'm done with the UFC. They can't ask any more favors for me. Nothing.
To make matters worse, after claiming to be forced to rush through his training camp in order to make the new fight date, Rampage ended up losing to Rashad Evans by unanimous decision. And according to him, at this point, the UFC began to purposely undermine him in several different ways. First, by blocking him from securing future big movie roles due to his agent signing him to the same exact talent agency that represented the UFC, and by trying to take away sponsorship opportunities in order to give them the fighters they had a better relationship with.
I had a know-it-all manager from the UK. The manager,
That'll do it.
And he thought it was a good idea to sign with the same agency that the UFC was represented by.
Yeah.
The same people that own the UFC now.
And it was
and they
nothing.
the UFC didn't want me doing any more movies.
What?
So
why? That brings more eyes to the UFC.
They didn't want me doing movies.
It wasn't like that back then. They wanted the fighters just to fight.
Okay, I'm gonna tell y'all something else. I did a Nike commercial and they called up Dana White to ask for like some footage, so I could use some footage. They called Dana up and then they come back and they tell me like, what's up with this Dana guy? He trying to talk us to putting Forrest Griffin in instead of you. Dana asked them to take me out and put Forrest Griffin in the commercial. Oh, and then I heard a couple other stories about they just didn't want me they didn't want me to be the guy doing something.
They also blocked him from doing an independent shoe deal with Reebok, which would have likely been worth a lot of money given the excuse that they didn't have a deal with him.
I teamed up with Reebok.
Yeah.
And we did a deal. And they were supposed to sponsor me. We did commercials and all. They gave me a shoe. Yeah. It was supposed to be like they did a shoe. It's an ugly shoe, but I like it. But listen though, the shoe was really good and it worked for what it was for, like running on the trails. And they paid me like, hey, we're gonna do a photo shoot. I get to the photo shoot, it was commercial with me and another football player. Long story short, they was gonna sponsor me for my UFC fight. That's why I left UFC. UFC like, no, Rampage can't be sponsored by Reebok because we don't, Dana White himself said, we don't have a deal with Reebok.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't got a deal with my other sponsors. Why you want to have a deal with Reebok?
Ironically, the UFC would later make Reebok their official apparel sponsor with very little financial benefit to the individual fighters on the roster, with even the champions only making $40,000 per fight to wear the mandatory fight kit, while the sponsorship revenue for the UFC was reportedly over $70 million. Rampage also felt that Dana was either underpaying him due to the numbers he was quoting at press conferences, or he was being dishonest about the numbers, in which case he felt entitled to the money anyway, as those were the official figures being quoted in the media.
If I sold over 1 million pay-per-view buys, my pay-per-view numbers jumped up like dramatically, right? And the fight between me and Rashad Evans, I broke that threshold. And he told me like, no, you did like 900 and something, right up on 1 million. But then in the press, he promoted like he told everybody we sold over 1 million buys. And I hit him up like, pay me what you told the fans. He said, no, I'm just telling them that that's part of promotion. You make yourself seem better. I said, all right, good. That's what you pay me on. Don't pay me on what you telling me that we made. Pay me on what you promoting out there.
By 2012, with Rampage one fight away from becoming a free agent, Dana began to publicly question his commitment to the sport. And while this could have been genuine, Dana pondering about whether or not a fighter's head is in the game or if they really want to fight always seems to correspond with contract or fight negotiations. Something that wasn't quite as obvious 13 years ago, leading to Rampage taking it extremely personal.
When I lost to Ryan Bader in Japan, you know, I got injured before that fight, and I called Dana right away. I said, man, I tore, I got a partial tear in my meniscus. He said, what you gonna do? I said, man, it's Japan, I still wanna fight. So when I went there and I fought, and I lost by decision, first thing Dana do in the press conference, like, I don't know what's going on with Rampage. I don't think he has it. I don't think he wanted it anymore. And I was like, man, that's when after all that Dana did to me, when he did that, that's when I kind of got pissed at him. And like, I lost my love for fighting.
During this time period, Rampage really felt like an outsider in the UFC, even lashing out at the way Joe Rogan called his fights, which doesn't have anything to do with this video, but I just wanted to mention it for the sake of posting this clip.
Whenever a guy is a jiu-jitsu fighter, Joe Rogan might as well be like playing the rusted trombone, like, he's a jiu-jitsu guy.
My goodness.
Before his final fight against Glover Teixeira, Rampage was visibly unhappy and disinterested in the promotion, playing a game at the pre-fight press conference and ignoring the media. Something that Dana addressed in a seemingly level-headed way afterwards, playing the role of a concerned acquaintance that doesn't quite understand what the issue is.
I'm kind of bummed out and I feel kind of sorry for him that he's doing this. You know, you feel however you feel. I feel like I've been there for Rampage. I feel like I've done right for him.
But as soon as it was announced that Rampage signed with Bellator, Dana's energy suddenly took a sharp turn.
He's lost 4 in a row.
Yeah, but
he's got every activist group on earth attacking him. The women's group, the gay and lesbian association. Go right down the list of all the activist groups that don't want to see that guy on television ever again.
He brings film. Yeah, I know you kind of made fun of him on the film star stuff, but he does bring that. He's a famous guy. You don't think he's going to draw on his fame?
What does he bring?
Well, he brings name recognition.
People who are fight fans want to see the best fighters in the world compete against each other. I quote Quinton Rampage Jackson, "I can no longer compete with the best in the world." That's a quote directly from him.
What about the entertainment value, though? You're a fan of Vince McMahon.
You throw Rampage in professional wrestling. Yeah, Rampage is hysterical. He's funny. But a lot of baggage comes along with Rampage Jackson.
Now, I don't really remember Rampage being attacked by activist groups around this time, so it seemed a bit out of place to mention that, and almost like an attempt to draw attention to some of his more controversial behavior in order to undermine his success in Bellator. And according to Rampage, it didn't stop there, as he claimed the UFC also blocked his boxing match against Roy Jones Jr.
I think after Dana heard what was going on, he went and tried to, spoil our plans.
This sounds like a bit of a stretch, but considering how many times he's been sabotaged by the UFC at that point, I could see why he would be paranoid. Rampage would return for one fight in the UFC amid contract disputes with Bellator in 2015, showing that maybe there were no hard feelings after all. But in subsequent years, he would speak negatively about his experience with the company and Dana specifically time and time again.
That left a bad taste in my mouth, and that's why I left the UFC, and then the UFC told everybody that I retired. So everybody think I retired, and I went to Bellator, and they knew that I wasn't going to fight for them as long as they had their Reebok contract, because I was talked about that. If Dana would have gave me some money, like, hey, Rampage, I'm sorry, I took this Reebok deal for you, huh? Here's a check. I want to say, but he didn't do that.
In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I believe that Dana really likes Rampage on a human level, and I really do think so. I feel like Dana doesn't feel slighted by Rampage in the same way that he does Randy Couture or Oscar De La Hoya or even Tito Ortiz. To him, while it might have gotten personal at points, overall it was just the way he did business, especially in those early years where he was constantly in survival mode. And anything that didn't directly benefit the UFC was taken as a threat. But from Rampage's side, even though he's recently claimed that he somewhat understood Dana's perspective, the fact that he feels like he financially suffered at his hands and was blocked from advancing in his career makes it really difficult to truly come to terms with their history, which is why he still sometimes lashes out at Dana in a way that bystanders may feel isn't always justified, but given the context of their history, definitely understandable. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like the video if you liked it, and if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. And if you want to support the channel further, become a member by hitting join if you're on Android or desktop, or the link in the description if you're on iOS.